In this presentation, I am going to be discussing wet tail in hamsters. Now, wet tail is a condition found in hamsters that is also known as proliferative ileitis, and this just refers to the buildup or the growth of bacteria in the ileum, which is in the intestines of the hamster. Now, this causes diarrhea to occur as a result of the bacteria that is found in the intestines. And this wet diarrhea will collect around the bottom of the hamster, giving the appearance of a wet tail, which is why it is so commonly called wet tail. And you can see that in this picture over here. There's a lot of wetness and dirt near the end and the tail of the hamster. Now, it is important to know that there are other reasons for diarrhea in hamsters, such as rapid diet changes, or if the hamster has been given any watery foods or vegetables, and this can cause diarrhea that is not wet tail. So it is important to look at the signs to make sure that your hamster has wet tail and not just another form of diarrhea. So there are multiple factors that can contribute to a hamster having wet tail. One of the main ones being age. Now, this condition can occur in hamsters at any age, but it is more common in young hamsters, specifically between 3 to 6 weeks of age. Breed also contributes to wet tail. It's not usually found in dwarf hamsters, not to say that it's impossible, but it is more commonly found in Syrian hamsters, specifically long-haired Syrian hamsters. Exposure to other hamsters is a big factor as well to getting this condition. Now, hamsters for the most part are solitary creatures, but in conditions when they are in pet stores or when they are with breeders, they might be exposed to other hamsters. And this condition is very contagious. So if there are other hamsters in a group that have wet tail, it is very likely that the ones that might not show symptoms yet will rapidly show symptoms. So this is a big factor as well. Now, for the causes, it is not exactly known what causes wet tail, but there are a couple things that have been attributed to it. The main one being intestinal bacteria, such as Lawsonia intracellularis, which you can see in this picture up here. This is what it looks like. Stress is a big factor, specifically when they are younger, because they might be in a pet store, they might be sent to the pet store as well as being purchased and sent to somebody's home. This is a very stressful time because they are going to be exposed to all different sorts of environments. Particularly in a pet store, the conditions might be a little bit crowded, they might be a little bit dirty, as they're with other hamsters as well. This can be a very stressful time, and also when they are taken to a new home because they will be in a new environment. This is a very stressful time, and wet tail is very common to pop up during this time. Poor diet as well can contribute to this, and unsanitary living conditions. If there is a lot of waste in the environment, if it's not being upkept, or if there are other hamsters in there that are contributing a lot of waste, this is going to cause a lot of bacteria to build up, and this can contribute to wet tail. Now, as far as the symptoms go, one of the main ones obviously is going to be the appearance of the wet tail. So wet and messy fur near the bottom of the hamster, which you can see in this photo right up here. There's a lot of wetness and messiness near the bottom, so this is obviously one of the main signs of this condition. They might not also be eating or drinking, so they might appear anorexic or be dehydrated. They are going to show visible signs of pain, particularly in the abdominal area. They might experience blood around their bottom, and they are going to be in a hunched over position, which you can see in this picture over here. This can be contributed to the abdominal pain that they are going to be experiencing. As far as treatment goes, it is important to consult a veterinarian for specific treatment plans and exactly what to do. But the main thing, if you do go to a veterinarian, they're likely going to ask you some questions about the hamster's history to find the root cause of the diarrhea, because, as I mentioned before, wet tail isn't the only thing that can cause diarrhea or the only thing that can be associated with diarrhea. So they might ask you questions about any dietary changes or any stressful situations in recent history that might have contributed to the condition, to see if it is something besides wet tail. But if they can narrow it down to wet tail, then they are likely going to prescribe antibiotics, such as doxycycline or Baytril, which you can see in this photo over here. The hamster is getting Baytril orally through a syringe. They might also give fluids. Electrolyte fluids are particularly important if the hamster is experiencing any sort of dehydration or if their overall condition is worsening due to wet tail. Now, even with treatment, the prognosis is generally not that great. Symptoms of wet tail can increase in severity very rapidly, and the condition of the hamster can decline within a couple hours, if not a couple of days. So it is very important, if you are noticing that your hamster is experiencing any sort of diarrhea or any symptoms of wet tail, to seek veterinary attention immediately, because this condition will very quickly become fatal. And even with treatment, if the condition is severe enough, it might not even be effective. So now that we've covered what the treatment is, let's talk about prevention. Now, there is no foolproof method to preventing wet tail, but there are some steps that can be taken in order to help reduce the risk. One of the main ones is to keep the hamster away from any other affected hamsters. Because this condition is so contagious, if you notice that any hamsters in a group are experiencing some of the symptoms, it's important to isolate that hamster as well as isolate any non-symptomatic hamsters, and make sure that you are keeping them far away from each other, as well as making sure that if you are taking care of one and then taking care of the other, that you are washing your hands and making sure that there is very limited contamination between affected and non-affected hamsters. It's also important to monitor any possible symptoms in the non-affected hamsters to see if they start to develop anything, so that way they can get treatment as quickly as possible. It is also important to maintain clean living conditions. As I mentioned before, bacteria and waste buildup in the environment can very rapidly contribute to this condition, so it is important to maintain proper spot cleaning and cleaning regimens, so that way you can minimize the risk of bacteria and diarrhea. It is also incredibly important to limit stress, particularly with young hamsters, because they are going to be going from the pet store to your home. This is a very stressful time for them, where they are going to be in environments that they are not used to. They might be, going from a situation with other hamsters to being by themselves. It is very important to be aware of that during the time and to make sure that you're limiting their stress as much as possible. Particularly, like you can see in this picture up here, avoid handling your hamster, especially shortly after you get them. You should give them at least a couple days or at least a week after you get them in their new environment, and just let them settle in without bothering them, without exposing them to anything that is going to cause them stress, so that way they feel more comfortable and more confident before you start handling or doing anything like that. It is also important to purchase a hamster that looks healthy. Like you can see in this picture down here that was taken at a pet store, there are many places where you can buy hamsters where they're not kept in the most sanitary and safest conditions. If you go to a pet store and you notice that their hamsters are being kept in overcrowded or small or exceptionally dirty conditions, this means that there is a higher likelihood that they either have had wet tail or that they might acquire it in the future. So it is important, if you notice that you don't buy from these places, because it is possible, even if you don't notice it when they're in the pet store, they might still have a higher level of stress even when you take them home and put them in a safer environment, that they might acquire it shortly after you get them. Therefore, it is important to remember that you get hamsters from places that are keeping them ethically and that are keeping them in conditions that will allow them to be as healthy as possible. So that is it for this presentation. Thank you so much for listening.